What would the rapid response be if somebody offered an objection to what you believe as a Christian? How would you navigate that quickly? And so I want to go through a few common objections to Christianity, and then we will talk about how you might quickly respond. The first thing I'm going to do is talk about the nature of the objection and make sure that you understand exactly what it is we're up against. If we don't understand the precise nature of what it is people are opposing, it's a lot harder to be able to answer those objections. So we want to kind of talk about that. Number two, I want to give you a structure that you can think and put in your head to think about how you might respond. Now look, every time I respond to one of these objections, I typically am responding by way of an outline that I have in my mind. Having done it a number of times on college campuses or in front of audiences during the Q&A, I do hold outlines for several key objections. And sometimes those outlines are just my own refresher course of how I first overcame the objection when I held it. Because I held these objections myself for 35 years as an atheist. So I kind of realize, I remember and recall the steps I took to knock down the objection. And I have those kind of holding on my head as an outline. And that's what I kind of refer to when I respond to the question. So what I want to do in each one of these objections is to kind of give you a mental outline. Here's the general approach we're going to take. And then we'll talk about a more robust kind of examination of the answer. And then finally, I want to offer for you the 60-second version. Because in the end, let's face it, folks, we're in a culture right now, an information age, and it's really kind of a misnomer in some ways. It's not just that we're just in an information age. We're in an incredibly concise information age, impatient information age. The impatient information age we're in only allows you so much time to make the case. In other words, if people are Googling for an answer and they've got a choice between a 1,000-word response and a 10,000-word response, a 100-word response and a 1,000-word response, they are almost always going to default to the shorter response. Time is precious. There's lots of internet information on the internet. All kinds of people are competing for our attention. All kinds of media is competing for our attention. So it's really important for us to be able to make a case briefly because the rest of the world is making it briefly. As a matter of fact, I think that those who oppose Christianity have done a good job of understanding and crafting objections in 140 characters. They know how to rhetorically and powerfully make a claim that seems incredibly hostile and seems hard for us to overcome, when in fact we know that the answer, like the answer for every criminal case I've ever investigated, is never quite that simple. Every one of these cases I make in front of a jury takes weeks to make the case, because that's the nature of case making. The problem, of course, is we're in a culture that's more and more impatient. It's actually getting harder to impanel jurors that have the patience to be able to connect the dots on a complex case. I do worry going forward with the culture we have today, what will the next, say, the 20 to 25-year-olds, when they're all filling up our juries, well, how difficult will it be for us to make complex cases that take 5 or 6 weeks in a culture that has not done that for a generation? It's going to be important for us to master to master brevity, to understand how do we make the case as rhetorically powerful as possible. And I do suspect that whatever side does that in a criminal trial, be it the prosecutor or the defense attorney, will have the best chance of winning the case. The first claim, the first objection I want to cover is perhaps one of the most simple objections, and maybe one of the most common. That's why it's a good place for us to start. And that is the simple question: who created God? You might see this question as just, if you were just to Google that, for example, in quotes, who created God, you would see that this is offered quite a bit. This question is asked quite a bit. And you want to think about, well, why does somebody ask the question that way? What is the heart of the problem? Well, of course, what they're offering is a larger objection in a shorter sentence. And the larger objection is, well, okay, look, if you're offering as Christians or as just theists, people who believe that God exists, if you're offering that this creator God is responsible for everything we see in the universe, well, Mr. Christian or Mr. Theist, you've got a problem you have to answer. If God created everything that we see, well, who created God? It's really an argument that attempts to take one step back before the creator. It's almost as if the atheist is saying, look, we're all looking for this cause, but you guys have created a cause that can't be the ultimate necessary cause, because the question could always be asked, who created your cause of the universe? What caused your cause of the universe? So the objection really is foundationally about causes, right? And what kind of cause might best account for the universe we are in, the caused universe we are in? And so when I answer this question, I have a certain structure in my mind. I think there are really 2 points I ultimately want to use or want to bring up in my response. And I want to make sure I either connect these 2 points in some way, or at least make sure I get to these 2 points. The first is kind of a simple, actually a term of English, actually, a rhetorical response that is really about how we use language and definitions. Think about this for a minute. We would say that the classic definition of God is that God, and this is true of every theistic system, that God is the necessary being. In other words, God is the uncreated creator of the universe. This infinite nature, this uncaused nature, is not a finite being. Everything else that God creates is finite, but God, being all-powerful, is also by his very nature infinite. Now, that's something that has been a classic claim of theism, a classic claim of Christianity. So when someone asks the question, who created God? What they're really asking us, if we were to take the definition of God that we hold and exchange it for the word God in that sentence, it would sound something like this. Mr. Christian, who created the uncreated creator of the universe? Now, we're just taking the definition, the uncreated creator of the universe, and put that in instead of the word God. And you can see now how silly that question really is, right? You're asking who created the uncreated creator. Well, wait a minute. If by definition we're saying God is the uncreated creator, then asking the question who created the uncreated creator is really a silly question. Well, you already know the answer to that because it's part of the definition. He's uncreated. So that's the first problem you have, and this is not as though this necessarily solves the problem for those who are asking it. But I just want us to be able to make sure we make this point, is that this is a classic claim of all theistic systems. But here's the second point. I think it's just as powerful. We aren't the only ones, as theists, who believe in something uncreated. We aren't the only ones, as theists, who believe that whatever it is that caused the universe to come into being was itself uncreated or uncaused, was itself eternal. As a matter of fact, as I was writing the book, God's Crime Scene, I found myself at several points reading the work of astrophysicists, and not just the kind of, not Christian astrophysicists, because the vast number of astrophysicists are atheists, and so I'm reading all of them. And I wanted to read what they would offer. What do they make of the universe? Do they believe it's a finite universe that has a beginning? If so, what do they think caused it? And what is the nature of the force that caused the universe? And all of my reading about atheists who offer an answer to that question, well, their answer is itself in some way uncaused, eternal. If you believe, for example, that somehow the universe leaps into existence from some kind of quantum environment, quantum vacuum, I know that's hard to posit, it's hard to make that kind of a claim, given that when the universe comes into existence, all space, time, and matter began to exist. In other words, before the beginning of space, time, and matter, there was nothing. I don't mean a void, a space. No, space didn't exist either. Nothing. That thing that Aristotle says rocks think about, nothing. That's all that exists. So when we're saying there's some environment, well, that's spatial. That term is spatial. That exists prior to, that's a temporal word. I mean, we're really stuck with language that gives away the problem. Whatever it is that causes the material universe, the natural universe made up of space, time, and matter, is itself neither space, time, nor matter, and is also uncaused by definition of these astrophysicists. In other words, if they think there's a quantum vacuum that causes the universe at a quantum level to emerge, and then this bubbles up into the larger universe, okay, whatever your theory is, well, if I asked you what caused the quantum vacuum, that astrophysicist is likely to say that vacuum was itself eternal. If they're going to offer it some other form of multiverse generator, creating an infinite number of universes, and one that just happens to look like ours. Whatever your claim is about the first cause of the universe, even from the atheistic perspective, they are typically going to answer the question, well, what caused your multiverse generator? What caused your quantum vacuum? What caused your cause? They're going to say, well, it has no cause, it's eternal. Here's my point. Everyone posits that their cause is uncaused. Everyone does that. Not just Christians, not just theists. Atheists also have to answer the same question. So to raise this question as an objection to theism or as an objection to Christianity doesn't really work unless you're willing to allow me to raise it against your worldview. All of us have this problem. So the question itself becomes impotent in its ability to knock down a worldview, because if it's going to knock down one worldview, it unfortunately will knock down every worldview. So this question is really nonsensical and unnecessary, but the better question is, what do we think is the uncaused first cause? Because all of us are looking for that. All of us think that thing exists. And of course, just as an aside, there are only two kinds of forces that could cause the universe to come into existence, either personal forces or impersonal forces. In God's Crime Scene, the book, I try to offer why I think that the personal force explanation is a far better one than the impersonal force explanation. But they're only, impersonal forces are all that's available to the atheist. By the way, you'll find all of this in God's Crime Scene, the book that I wrote last year. Now, let's try to offer this in the shortest possible explanation. For somebody who would say, well, who created God? I would say, well, look, first of all, by definition, we believe, and all theists believe, that the definition of God is that he is the uncreated creator of the universe. So when you ask this question, who created the uncreated creator of the universe, it's kind of like you're asking a question that already has an answer. It's in the definition of God. But let's just put that aside for a second. Remember that all of us are looking for the same uncreated first cause of the universe. This is no different from me as a theist as it is from my atheist friends. My atheist friends would argue this is some kind of multiverse generator or quantum environment, some type of eternal cause that causes, by the way, we're both doing this, we're both looking for an uncaused first cause, because we know if we don't have an uncaused first cause, we have kind of an infinite regress problem, right? We could always ask, well, who created that? Then who created that? And who created that? So in the end, I'm no different as a theist than my atheist friends. We're all looking for the uncaused first cause. That's why a question like who created God really is nonsensical. It has no power to destroy theism, and it has no power to affirm theism, because all of us, regardless of worldview, have to answer the exact same question. Now there I've offered an answer for you in less than 60 seconds that I hope at least knocks down that issue or creates further discussion. By the way, if you do have a chance for further discussion, you're going to want to ask the questions or make the point that there are only two kinds of forces, personal and impersonal. And by the way, in God's Crime Scene, I lay out why those personal force is the absolute best answer, because it only explains, an impersonal force won't give you all pieces of evidence in the universe that I describe in that book. You're going to have a personal cause to get all 8 pieces. All right, I want to answer an objection that is going to come in different forms. I'm going to give it to you in one form, but you may not hear it in precisely this form. This might be the kind of objection that you hear in a slightly different form, and it's going to depend on who asks it and how they ask and what the context of the question is. But on the website, I listed it this way. The objection is, I can't believe in God because I have too many unanswered questions. In other words, it might come out something like this. Look, you Christians don't even agree on everything. You don't have answers for half the questions. You disagree what the answer might be. You've got a lot of open questions. How do I reconcile, for example, the sovereignty of God with the free agency of humans? How do I reconcile other questions, like what is the exact mechanism by which God creates? What does that look like? These are all kinds of questions that I get, even questions that I hold. Which, for example, what is the clearest reading of Genesis 1, and how did God create the entire universe, and what kinds of steps were taken, and are the days mentioned in Genesis 1 literal days or epic periods of time? Look, Christians argue about these things without landing an answer for any of those things. I at least want to acknowledge to my atheist friends that, yeah, it does appear that we have some open questions. And it appears that I'm not going to be able probably in this lifetime to get answers to those questions. So then the issue becomes, well, okay, so how can you believe in a worldview in which you have open, unanswered questions? That's the nature of the objection. Can you see it, why it's so powerful? There is, unfortunately, appears to be a certain level of certainty in an information age that we're living in that people want to have before they can ever jump in with you. And it's almost always going to be described to you as 100% certain. I cannot jump into this worldview unless I have 100% certainty. Well, how do we respond to those kinds of objections? Knowing that really I could never give anyone 100% certainty about the Christian worldview. Am I just done? Am I just toast? No. Actually, I think we can still move forward. Now, I want to share with you the outline in my head that I typically have when trying to answer that question. I go back to my training as a cold case detective working in a jury setting, and I want to make a couple of quick points. Number one, the first point I want to make is that you don't have to have every question answered in order to know something is true. So that's a point I'm going to have to make. I'll get to that in a minute. And two, I'm going to want to answer that we do have good enough information to make a decision here. Those are the 2 points I'm going to have to reconcile in my answer to these folks who offer that objection. So let me just mine it out a little deeper, and then I'll give you the 60-second version. The first thing I'm going to want to ask is do you think you have 100% certainty about anything you think you know in your life? Because the reality of it is, if you were to mine out those big choices you've made, you aren't 100% certain about anything, except maybe your own existence, right? That you have thoughts because you're having thoughts now. But in terms of what you think you know about the outside external world, really, what do you think you know to 100% certainty? You could go to your car tomorrow and start the engine and have it blow up in your driveway. It happens all the time to people all over the country. Probably not going to happen to you. It's not reasonable. We have to decide and help people understand there's a difference between what's possible and what's reasonable. I can have possible doubts, yet still convict somebody beyond a reasonable doubt because I don't hold a reasonable doubt. I only hold possible doubts. This is very common, right? I mean, you've got lots of possible doubts, but you reason through them. If you think, well, gosh, I found this text from an unknown person on my spouse's cell phone. Well, I guess it's possible your spouse is cheating on you, but if you have a track record with your spouse and you know enough about your spouse to know that isn't true, it won't take long for you to realize that that doubt is not reasonable. That's a possible doubt. But without perfect knowledge, you could really never know with 100% certainty about anything. That's just the case, right? We are limited, finite creatures who don't have infinite knowledge. Therefore, we cannot answer every question. So that's the first thing. Also, as an atheist, I had tons of unanswered questions. As a matter of fact, I've written that entire book, God's Crime Scene, really about the unanswered questions of atheism. Now, I'm not suggesting that that alone is why you should not trust atheism, because you have questions you can't answer. I get that. You have to take a view with unanswered questions. We all hold a view that has unanswered questions. As an atheist, though, I couldn't tell you how the universe came into existence, why it appears to be fine-tuned, how life originated from non-life, why it has the appearance of design if there is no designer, how we have consciousness and free agency, and why there are objective, transcendent moral truths and obligations, and why there's a standard that's objective for goodness by which we judge anything and call it evil. I can't give you good atheistic, materialistic answers for those big key points. I can't. And by the way, the more people study these, the deeper the wormhole gets. I don't think atheism can answer those 8 questions. Now, as a theist, I have some open questions too. Lots. But the question really for me is, which worldview gives me the best answers with the least questions? And of these 2, I think it was clear for me that theism answers the questions in a way that's much more satisfying and seems to resonate with my daily experience in a way that atheism didn't. I know I have consciousness. I know I have free agency. And people like Sam Harris, who are atheists, who do not believe that is even possible, we'll talk about that on a future episode, really have to hold to a worldview in which they think the free agency and consciousness are simply an illusion. And he will even say that. But I don't believe those are illusions. I believe you are actually watching this show right now and thinking about this question yourself because you are a conscious thinking creature who makes free choices. But my Christian worldview can answer that, given that we are created in the image of a conscious, free-thinking God, better than my atheistic worldview, which says we are in a deterministic, purely material, physicalistic universe in which all we have are neurons firing caused by prior neurons that we can't control. And when that kind of deterministic universe, you don't either have consciousness or free agency. Here's the problem. My worldview still has open questions. And so does the atheistic worldview. And what we task jurors when we put them in a panel, we ask them a simple question. Are you the kind of person who can make a decision without every question being answered? Are you the kind of person that really needs to have every question answered before you can even make a decision? If someone says, yeah, I think I am the kind of person who needs every question answered, then we simply say you're excused. Because we can't use jurors that think they have to have 100% certainty. That is not the legal standard. It's beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond a possible doubt. Now, I've kind of mined out the answer I might be thinking about in the structure I'm thinking about it in. And I also want to add one more thing, that I think that the theistic worldview, because of the evidence we do have, is the closest, best answer with the least unanswered questions. I got to be able to make these kinds of points now in 60 seconds to my friends. So let's just kind of show you what that might look like. Okay, it might look like this. I can't really trust any form of theism because every form has got tons of open, unanswered questions. Even theists, even people who believe this stuff, can't answer all the questions. I would say that's absolutely right. But that's also true in every criminal trial you will ever work. There will always be open, unanswered questions. And in every one of these trials that I've actually won, there were open, unanswered questions, yet every jury came to a conclusion. The right conclusion. Why? Because there's a difference between possible and reasonable. Every worldview has unanswered questions. Don't think for a second that atheism doesn't hold its own unanswered questions. Of course it does. The real question is not, is there a worldview with no unanswered questions? Because there isn't one. The real question is, which worldview has the least number of unanswered questions, the least significant unanswered questions, and the best evidence for its positive value, the kinds of questions it can answer. Now those two kinds of, if you're looking at worldviews under that standard, well, guess what? Theism holds up really well because it can explain the stuff we see in the universe. It can explain the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning we see in the universe, the origin of life in the universe, the fine-tuning and appearance of design in biology, consciousness, free agency, morality, even the standard of good, God, by which we would judge anything and call it evil. It turns out that theistic worldview does a better job of explaining the evidence, even if you think there are still important unanswered questions, and of course there are. Theism answers the most. Okay, now you've had a couple of questions we've asked and answered by giving you kind of the structure, how we might answer it, a longer version and the 60-second version. I hope that is helpful as you get ready to have the most important conversations you're going to have around the holidays, those questions that get raised, if someone does raise them with you, about the nature of your Christian beliefs. Until next week, I'll see you right back here at Cold Case Christianity.